Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. Ashcombe Hall stood upon the cliffs like an aging monarch refusing to surrender its throne. Beyond the weathered stone terraces, the gray sea rolled endlessly beneath a sky of gathering clouds, while the wind carried the scent of salt and wet heather across the lonely estate. It was a place built for permanence, yet every portrait lining its corridors seemed to watch with the quiet anxiety of those who knew permanence was an illusion. By late afternoon, the guests had all arrived. Sir Adrian Blackwood, master of the estate, greeted each visitor with impeccable courtesy, though his smile never quite reached his pale blue eyes. At 68, he possessed the rigid dignity of a man who had spent a lifetime commanding respect and had lately discovered that respect could not silence resentment. His daughter, Eleanor, moved through the drawing room with measured grace, offering tea while carefully avoiding her father's gaze. Years of quiet obedience had taught her how to conceal disappointment beneath perfect manners. Her younger brother, Charles, lacked such restraint. Handsome and charming, he laughed too loudly and poured whiskey before the servants had even finished unpacking the luggage. Gambling debts had become whispered family knowledge, though never discussed openly. Across the room stood Lady Margaret Ashcroft, Sir Adrian's widowed sister. She wore black silk despite the season, her sharp features softened only by silver hair arranged with military precision. Every sentence she uttered sounded less like conversation than judgment. Near the fireplace, Dr. Edwin Mercer examined a collection of antique clocks with unusual fascination. Officially, he was Sir Adrian's personal physician. Unofficially, he had become indispensable to the household during the master's declining health. Vivian Hale arrived last. A celebrated jeweler from London, she carried herself with effortless confidence. Around her neck rested no jewels, only a slender silver chain from which hung a tiny crystal tear, almost invisible beneath the folds of her emerald dress. Several eyes lingered upon it. Captain Arthur Hastings, invited as an old acquaintance of Sir Adrian, noticed the silent exchange. "There seems," he remarked quietly to their fellow guest, Professor Julian Armitage, "to be a curious uneasiness among this gathering." The professor smiled faintly. "Every old family has ghosts, Captain. Some merely wait longer before introducing themselves." Dinner began beneath crystal chandeliers, whose warm light failed to soften the atmosphere. Conversation drifted politely from politics to archaeology, from European travel to the coming autumn season. Yet beneath every sentence lay another conversation entirely. The servants sensed it. Even the music from the grand piano sounded cautious. Halfway through the meal, Sir Adrian rose. "My friends," he announced, lifting his glass, "you have honored my invitation. There remains one matter I believe should no longer remain hidden." The room became still. He reached into the inner pocket of his dinner jacket and withdrew a velvet case. When it opened, every eye fixed upon the necklace inside. Delicate platinum links cradled 12 remarkable diamonds surrounding a single pale sapphire shaped like a falling tear. "The necklace of forgotten tears," murmured Lady Margaret. Its reputation had traveled through aristocratic circles for decades. Some claimed it had belonged to an exiled empress. Others insisted it had vanished during the Great War before mysteriously returning to the Blackwood family. Sir Adrian regarded the necklace with something approaching regret. "It has remained locked away for 30 years. Charles leaned forward. "I assumed you'd sold it." "I considered doing so." Vivian Hale spoke for the first time. "It would fetch a remarkable fortune." Sir Adrian closed the case. "It will not be sold." Silence. "It shall instead pass to its rightful heir." No one spoke. Then Eleanor quietly asked, "And who is that, father?" Sir Adrian looked slowly around the table. "When breakfast is served tomorrow morning, I shall announce my decision." The words settled over the room like winter frost. Charles's smile vanished. Lady Margaret lowered her eyes. Dr. Mercer gripped his wineglass a little too tightly. Vivian Hale seemed suddenly unable to meet anyone's gaze. Only Hastings noticed the butler, Mr. Finch, standing motionless beside the door, his expression betraying genuine alarm. The evening dissolved into strained conversation before guests gradually retired to their rooms. Rain began striking the windows with increasing force, while distant thunder rolled across the sea. Near midnight, Hastings found himself unable to sleep. As he crossed the upper gallery, he heard voices drifting from the library below. One belonged unmistakably to Sir Adrian. The other was low, urgent, and trembling with anger. "You cannot possibly mean to do this," the unseen speaker said. "I have delayed long enough," Sir Adrian replied calmly. "If you announce it tomorrow, I shall." A long pause followed. Then came words that echoed through the silent hall. "If you do, someone will not live to see another sunrise." The library door closed. Darkness reclaimed Ashcombe Hall. Chapter 2. The Crime. The storm reached its full fury shortly after midnight. Rain lashed against the ancient windows of Ashcombe Hall with relentless determination, while the wind prowled through the surrounding woods like a restless beast. Every timber in the old manor seemed to groan beneath the weight of the weather, and sleep came uneasily to those within its walls. Captain Arthur Hastings awoke before dawn to the distant tolling of the grandfather clock in the entrance hall. 5 measured chimes. He turned over, intending to return to sleep, when another sound pierced the silence. A scream. It was not loud, but it carried a note of pure terror that left no room for misunderstanding. Within moments, doors flew open along the upper corridor. Half-dressed guests hurried into the hallway, their faces pale in the wavering light of oil lamps hastily lit by anxious servants. Mrs. Gibbons, the housekeeper, stood at the foot of the staircase, trembling so violently that she could scarcely speak. "The library," she whispered. "Sir Adrian." Hastings descended the stairs 2 at a time. The heavy oak door to the library stood slightly ajar. Inside, the fire had burned low, casting long shadows across shelves lined with leather-bound books. A crystal decanter lay shattered on the Persian rug, its contents mingling with fragments of glass. Sir Adrian Blackwood sat in his high-backed leather chair before the fireplace. At first glance, he appeared merely asleep, but one look at his face told another story. His eyes remained half open, frozen in an expression not of fear but astonishment. One hand rested upon the arm of the chair. The other still clutched the velvet jewel case. It was empty. "The necklace," Eleanor whispered behind Hastings. "It has gone." No one moved. Dr. Edwin Mercer stepped forward, his physician's instincts overcoming his shock. He knelt beside the chair, gently touched Sir Adrian's wrist, then examined the faint bluish discoloration around the lips. After several silent seconds, he rose. "I'm afraid Sir Adrian is dead." The announcement seemed to drain every remaining warmth from the room. "Heart failure?" Charles asked hopefully. Dr. Mercer slowly shook his head. "I do not believe so." He picked up the shattered wineglass lying near the chair. "There is a bitter almond scent." Lady Margaret closed her eyes. "Poison." The word hung in the air. Inspector Harold Whitcomb of the county police arrived shortly after 7 o'clock, delayed only by flooded country roads. A practical man with broad shoulders and little patience for speculation, he immediately ordered the room sealed. "No one leaves the estate," he declared. "The storm has done that for us," Professor Armitage observed quietly. Indeed, the single road leading from Ashcombe Hall had partially collapsed during the night. Fallen trees blocked the remainder. Until help arrived, everyone present was effectively trapped. A perfect closed circle. The inspector began reconstructing the previous evening. Dinner had concluded shortly before 10. Sir Adrian retired to the library at approximately 10:15. According to the butler, Mr. Finch, he requested that no one disturb him. At 10:30, Charles claimed he had gone directly to the billiard room. Lady Margaret retired to her chamber before 11. Eleanor insisted she had spent nearly an hour writing letters in the morning room. Dr. Mercer stated he had visited the conservatory for fresh air before returning to his room. Vivian Hale admitted taking a solitary walk along the covered terrace despite the approaching storm. Each account sounded plausible, yet none could be independently confirmed. Inspector Whitcomb examined the library carefully. The windows remained locked from inside. The chimney was far too narrow for a person. The only entrance was the heavy oak door, which showed no sign of forced entry. A locked room murder. The inspector frowned. Either Sir Adrian admitted his killer willingly. He looked around the room. Or someone among us is lying. His constables searched the house. The necklace of forgotten tears was nowhere to be found. More curious still was another discovery. Upon Sir Adrian's writing desk rested a sheet of stationery. Most of it was blank. Only one sentence had been written in dark blue ink. Not every tear is shed in sorrow. No signature. No explanation. Just the single enigmatic sentence. The inspector assumed it was a dying message. Hastings was less certain. He noticed something else. The ink on the paper appeared remarkably fresh. Almost too fresh. Before he could mention the observation, Eleanor suddenly gasped. Everyone turned. Pinned beneath the edge of the velvet jewel case lay a small object overlooked amid the confusion. It was a silver cufflink engraved with the initials. CB. Charles Blackwood stared at it in disbelief. I've never seen that before. No one answered. The silence itself sounded like an accusation. Inspector Whitcomb carefully lifted the cufflink with gloved fingers. I believe, he said gravely, our investigation has just become considerably simpler. Charles's face drained of all color as every eye in the room settled upon him. Outside, thunder rolled once more across the cliffs, and somewhere deep within Ashcombe Hall, an unseen door closed softly, as though someone had just finished erasing the last trace of an even darker secret. Chapter 3. The Little Gray Cells. The storm had spent its anger by the following afternoon, yet Ashcombe Hall remained as isolated as an island. Fallen oaks blocked the road, and the swollen river below the cliffs had carried away part of the old stone bridge. Inspector Harold Whitcomb disliked being cut off from his headquarters, but there was little to be done except continue his inquiry. He had already formed a working theory. Charles Blackwood possessed a clear motive. He was burdened with gambling debts, knew of his father's intention to name an heir, and a cufflink bearing his initials had been found beside the empty jewel case. To the inspector, the evidence pointed in one direction. I expect an arrest before the day is out, he remarked. Captain Hastings, however, remained unconvinced. There was something altogether too convenient about the cufflink, as if it had been placed where it was meant to be discovered. It was shortly after 3 o'clock when the front bell sounded. The butler opened the great oak door to admit 2 gentlemen, damp from their difficult journey across the damaged road. The first was a local constable. The second removed his hat with meticulous care before brushing an imaginary speck of dust from his immaculate sleeve. He was of modest height, his waxed mustache as perfectly symmetrical as if it had been measured with a ruler. His dark eyes missed nothing, though they seemed almost amused by the solemn grandeur of Ashcombe Hall. Hercule Poirot, he said with a slight bow. I regret that such melancholy circumstances have brought me here. Hastings broke into a smile. My dear Poirot. My good Hastings. Their handshake was warm but brief. Poirot disliked unnecessary displays of emotion. Inspector Whitcomb looked mildly surprised. I understand you were passing through the county? Not entirely by chance, Poirot replied. Sir Adrian Blackwood wrote to me 3 days ago, requesting a discreet consultation. You were expected? I was. Poirot reached into his coat and produced an unopened envelope. It arrived at my hotel after I had already departed. I thought it best to bring it with me. The inspector examined the seal. It was unmistakably Sir Adrian's. Curious timing, he murmured. Indeed, said Poirot. Without asking another question, Poirot walked directly to the library. He stood motionless in the center of the room. For nearly 2 minutes, he neither spoke nor touched a single object. Instead, he looked at the chair, at the desk, at the fireplace, at the windows, at the carpet. Finally, he smiled faintly. The room is untidy. Inspector Whitcomb blinked. There has been a murder. Precisely. Poirot turned. But the disorder is selective. He pointed with his cane. The decanter lies shattered. Yet notice that the books beside it have not been splashed with wine. No one had observed that. The rug, Poirot continued, has been turned slightly. Someone wished to conceal a stain, perhaps, or retrieve something very small. He knelt beside Sir Adrian's writing desk. The ink bottle remains tightly sealed. The inspector frowned. So, Poirot lifted the mysterious note. Not every tear is shed in sorrow. He smiled politely. A charming sentence. You believe it is genuine? I believe, said Poirot softly, that Sir Adrian did not write it. A silence followed. The handwriting resembles his, Whitcomb argued. Yes. The paper came from his own desk. Certainly. The ink is his. Probably. Poirot folded the sheet carefully. And yet it was written by someone else. How can you tell? Because Sir Adrian always crossed the letter T with a long, deliberate stroke. He pointed to the sentence. Here, the crossbars are short. Hastings stared. You noticed that already? My friend, one notices such things because one looks. The inspector's confidence faltered for the first time. They proceeded to interview each member of the household. Lady Margaret remained composed. My brother had enemies, she admitted. Successful men usually do. But none within this house. A slight hesitation. I would not say that. Charles answered with visible irritation. Yes, I argued with father. About the necklace? About everything. Where were you between 10 and 11? In the billiard room. Alone? Charles hesitated. Yes. Poirot said nothing. He merely nodded. Dr. Mercer appeared calm, though his fingers repeatedly adjusted the cuffs of his jacket. Vivian Hale answered every question with admirable confidence, yet she seemed unusually interested whenever the missing necklace was mentioned. Only Eleanor appeared genuinely exhausted. I keep thinking, she whispered, that father intended to tell us something more. What do you mean, mademoiselle? He looked frightened during dinner. Poirot regarded her carefully. Not frightened. She looked surprised. No. He looked relieved. That evening, Hastings found Poirot standing alone before one of the long corridor windows. You suspect someone already? Poirot smiled. I suspect everyone. But surely Charles. No. The cufflink. A gift to the police. The poison. A distraction. The missing necklace. The least important object in this house. Hastings stared in disbelief. The least important? Poirot turned toward the darkened library. My friend, people believe this crime concerns a necklace. His eyes rested upon the closed library door. It does not. He paused, his voice becoming almost a whisper. It concerns something Sir Adrian discovered only yesterday. At that very moment, a servant hurried breathlessly down the corridor. Mr. Poirot, what is it? We have found something. Where? In the old chapel. What? The servant swallowed hard. A page, torn from Sir Adrian's diary. Poirot's expression did not change, but Hastings noticed the unmistakable gleam in his eyes. At last, one of the murderer's carefully hidden secrets had begun to surface. Chapter 4. Secrets Beneath Politeness. The old family chapel stood at the eastern edge of the estate, half hidden by ancient yew trees whose twisted branches shut out much of the afternoon light. Built generations before Ashcombe Hall had reached its present grandeur, it possessed the quiet melancholy of a place that had witnessed too many funerals and too few weddings. Captain Hastings followed Hercule Poirot inside. Dust floated lazily through narrow, stained glass windows, and the scent of damp stone lingered in the cool air. Near the altar, Inspector Whitcomb held a single folded sheet of paper inside an evidence envelope. Poirot accepted the envelope with delicate care. The page had clearly been torn from a leather-bound diary. Most of the writing had survived, though the final lines ended abruptly where the page had been ripped away. Sir Adrian's handwriting was unmistakable. At last I possessed the proof. For 20 years I believed I had protected the family, but I now know I merely protected the wrong person. Tomorrow, before breakfast, everything shall be put right. If I remain silent any longer, justice itself will become a lie. The final sentence ended mid-word. Hastings looked up. Protected the wrong person? Poirot folded the page thoughtfully. A confession without a confession. Inspector Whitcomb frowned. I don't see how this changes matters. Charles still had every reason to murder his father. Perhaps. Poirot's gaze drifted toward the weathered altar. But motives are curious things, Inspector. They often resemble shadows. From a distance they appear large. Under proper light, they become something altogether different. Back at Ashcombe Hall, Poirot requested that each guest meet him privately in the morning room. Lady Margaret entered first. She sat perfectly upright, gloved hands resting upon her cane. My brother trusted you enough to summon you, Poirot observed. So it would seem. Did he also trust you with family secrets? Her expression remained composed. There are no families without secrets. Poirot smiled. A most truthful answer. She hesitated only briefly. There was once an unfortunate disagreement concerning the Blackwood inheritance. Between whom? My brother and Charles. Only Charles. A flicker crossed her face. There were others. She refused to elaborate. Charles Blackwood appeared less composed. I know what everyone thinks. They think you are desperate. I was. Were. Charles looked away. Yesterday afternoon, Father agreed to settle my debts. Poirot raised an eyebrow. An interesting detail. I didn't tell the inspector because no one would believe me. Why not? Because Father insisted the arrangement remain private until breakfast. Breakfast, Poirot repeated quietly. Everything seemed to point toward the announcement Sir Adrian had intended to make. Vivian Hale arrived next. She admired one of the old paintings while answering Poirot's questions. The necklace is historically priceless, she admitted, but not impossible to replace. No masterpiece is impossible to imitate. Poirot turned sharply. To imitate. She smiled. It is my profession. You examined the necklace closely during dinner. I did. And it looked different. Different how? I cannot explain. Poirot noticed she had unconsciously begun twisting the tiny crystal pendant around her own neck. A sign of nervousness. Dr. Edwin Mercer entered carrying his medical bag. His answers were measured. Professional. Almost rehearsed. You confirmed poison. I did. What poison? The symptoms suggest cyanide. But you are not certain? No laboratory exists within the manor. Poirot nodded. Then, quite unexpectedly, he asked, How long have you known Sir Adrian? Nearly 20 years. And did he trust you? I believe so. Entirely. For the first time, Dr. Mercer failed to answer immediately. Late that evening, Hastings found Poirot arranging several objects upon the library table. The torn diary page. A copy of Sir Adrian's will. The mysterious handwritten note. The empty velvet jewel case. None of it seemed connected. Yet Poirot stared at them with growing satisfaction. What do you see? Hastings asked. I see 3 lies. 3. The first is obvious. He tapped the cufflink. It was planted. The second. Poirot lifted the mysterious note. This was written after Sir Adrian died. And the third. Poirot looked toward the portrait of Sir Adrian hanging above the fireplace. The murderer wished everyone to believe the necklace was the reason for the crime. Hastings frowned. Wasn't it? Poirot shook his head. No. Then why steal it? Because the necklace concealed something. At that very moment, there was a hesitant knock at the library door. Come in, Poirot called. The butler, Mr. Finch, stepped inside. His face had lost all color. I have tried to remain loyal to the family, he said quietly. But I cannot remain silent any longer. Poirot gestured toward a chair. What is it you wish to tell me? The old servant's hands trembled. On the night before Sir Adrian died. He swallowed hard. I saw him arguing with someone in this very room. Who? Mr. Finch closed his eyes as though the admission itself caused him pain. I could not see the person's face. But I recognized the voice. A long silence followed. Poirot did not interrupt. Finally, the butler spoke the name. Hastings felt the blood drain from his face. If the old man's memory was correct, then everything they believed about the murder was about to be turned upside down. Chapter 5. The False Solution. Morning broke beneath a pale sky, though Ashcombe Hall remained wrapped in an uneasy silence. The storm had passed, but its shadow lingered in every corridor. Servants spoke in whispers, doors closed softly, and each guest watched the others with growing suspicion. Captain Hastings found Inspector Whitcomb in the library, studying a bundle of documents spread across Sir Adrian's desk. The inspector looked unusually satisfied. I believe we have enough. For what? To arrest Charles Blackwood. Hastings frowned. On what grounds? Whitcomb counted them on his fingers. The gambling debts, the quarrel at dinner, the cufflink, and now this. He held up a letter addressed to a London moneylender. Its contents were brief. Unless I receive payment before the end of the week, proceedings will begin immediately. The amount owed was staggering. A desperate man, the inspector said, is often a dangerous one. At that moment Charles was escorted into the library. His face was pale but composed. I didn't kill my father. You were the last person known to have argued with him. Charles looked bewildered. I never denied arguing. You concealed your financial difficulties. I concealed my pride. The necklace disappeared. I never touched it. Inspector Whitcomb folded his notebook. Mr. Blackwood, I am placing you under arrest for the murder of Sir Adrian Blackwood. The room fell silent. Eleanor gasped. Lady Margaret closed her eyes. Only Hercule Poirot remained perfectly still. "My dear Inspector," he said gently, "may I ask one small question before you proceed?" Wickham sighed. "If you must." Poirot approached Charles. "You told me your father agreed to settle your debts." "Yes, I did." "And what would happen if he announced that before breakfast?" Charles hesitated. "My creditors would have been satisfied. So your greatest problem would disappear." "Exactly." Poirot turned to the inspector. Wickham frowned. "People act irrationally. Sometimes." Poirot smiled faintly. "But murder, particularly this murder, required careful planning." The inspector crossed his arms. "You have another explanation?" "I have several." Poirot walked slowly around the library. The poison was prepared in advance. He picked up the shattered crystal decanter. This glass was broken deliberately. He pointed toward the fireplace. The diary page was removed before the murder. Finally, he looked at the inspector. "And the cufflink was planted afterward." Wickham shook his head. "You have no proof." "No." "Then these are merely theories." Poirot nodded pleasantly. For the moment. That afternoon, Poirot asked Hastings to accompany him to the gallery above the ballroom. "What are we looking for?" Hastings asked. "Not what?" Poirot smiled. "When?" He stopped before an enormous grandfather clock. It had stood silent since the storm. Poirot examined its polished brass pendulum, then opened the narrow wooden case beneath. Inside lay a thin smear of black wax. "Curious," he murmured. "What is it?" The clock stopped at precisely 10:43. "How can that matter?" "Because every witness believes Sir Adrian was alive after 11. Hastings stared. "Then someone lied about the time?" "Exactly." Poirot closed the case. "My friend, when people remember events, they rarely remember the events themselves." "What do they remember?" "The clock." Later that evening, Poirot requested another conversation with Mr. Finch, the butler. "You told us you recognized the voice in the library." "I did, sir." "Why did you not tell the inspector?" The old servant lowered his eyes. "I wish to protect someone." "From suspicion?" "From disgrace." Poirot remained silent. After a long pause, Finch whispered, "It was Dr. Mercer." Hastings inhaled sharply. "The doctor?" "I heard Sir Adrian say, 'You should have told me the truth years ago.' And then?" The doctor replied, "If the truth comes out now, it will destroy everything." Poirot thanked the butler, but asked him to speak of the conversation to no one else. As they walked back through the corridor, Hastings could scarcely contain himself. "Surely Mercer is the murderer." Poirot shook his head. "No. But the argument? Very important. The secret? Also important. Then why not Mercer?" Poirot stopped before the portrait of Sir Adrian Blackwood. "The doctor is hiding something." "What?" "I do not yet know. But I am increasingly certain." Poirot's eyes rested on the painted necklace around the portrait's frame. That someone else knew his secret. Near midnight, Poirot returned alone to the library. He carefully examined the empty velvet jewel case beneath a reading lamp. For nearly 10 minutes, he studied its silk lining without speaking. Then, with remarkable delicacy, he slipped the point of a small penknife beneath the inner fabric. The lining lifted. Hidden between the layers was a tiny folded piece of parchment. Poirot unfolded it slowly. His expression, usually serene, became unexpectedly grave. It was never about the necklace. The parchment contained only a few handwritten names and a single date from 20 years earlier. Yet those names transformed the entire case. Poirot folded the paper, placed it carefully inside his pocket, and extinguished the lamp. At last, he knew why Sir Adrian had been murdered. What he still did not know was which one of the people sleeping under Ashcombe Hall's roof had been willing to kill to keep that 20-year-old secret buried forever. Chapter 6. The Hidden Truth. The following morning dawned with deceptive calm. Sunlight broke through the thinning clouds and spilled across the gardens of Ashcombe Hall, where the rain had washed every leaf to a brilliant green. To an outsider, the estate might have appeared peaceful once more. Inside, however, the atmosphere had grown almost unbearable. Every conversation ceased when another person entered the room. Every glance lingered a fraction too long. The murder had done more than claim Sir Adrian Blackwood's life. It had stripped away the comfortable pretenses behind which everyone had lived. Captain Hastings found Hercule Poirot in the conservatory, studying a single white camellia. "You look pleased," Hastings remarked. I am never pleased by murder, my friend. But you've discovered something. Poirot nodded. I have discovered that everyone has been telling the truth. Hastings stared. Everyone? Yes. That is impossible. No. Poirot smiled gently. It is merely incomplete. One by one, Poirot revisited the timeline. Sir Adrian had entered the library shortly after 10:15. Charles had indeed gone to the billiard room. Lady Margaret had retired upstairs. Vivian Hale had walked the covered terrace. Dr. Mercer had visited the conservatory. Each statement was supported by small details the police had overlooked. Yet there remained a gap. Exactly 17 minutes. From 10:43 until 11 o'clock. No one could reliably account for anyone else's movements. The murderer, Poirot said quietly, lived within those 17 minutes. That afternoon, Poirot requested a private meeting with Dr. Edwin Mercer. The doctor entered the study with his usual professional composure, though dark circles beneath his eyes betrayed several sleepless nights. You wish to see me? I did. Poirot placed the folded parchment from the necklace case upon the desk. I found this. Dr. Mercer glanced at the names. The color drained instantly from his face. So, he whispered. He knew. For how long? I don't know. Poirot remained silent. Silence, Hastings had learned, was often his most effective question. At last, the doctor spoke. 20 years ago, Sir Adrian asked me to certify the death of a young servant. A woman? Yes. What truly happened? Mercer's voice trembled. She died after taking poison. By accident. The doctor closed his eyes. No. A suicide. Another silence. Finally, Hastings felt the room grow colder. By whom? Poirot asked. I never learned. You signed the certificate and concealed the circumstances. I believed I was protecting the family's reputation. Poirot nodded sadly. No, doctor. He tapped the parchment. You were protecting the murderer. Mercer's shoulders collapsed. For the first time since the investigation had begun, the physician looked like an old man. I have regretted it every day. There is something else. Poirot looked up. The necklace. Yes. It wasn't valuable merely because of the diamonds. You knew? The hidden compartment? Sir Adrian once told me that certain truths were too dangerous for ordinary safes. After the doctor departed, Hastings turned toward Poirot. Then the parchment was hidden there all along. For 20 years. And Sir Adrian finally decided to reveal it. Exactly. Hastings frowned. But the parchment contains only names. Poirot smiled faintly. It contains relationships. What relationships? The ones everyone wished to forget. That evening, an unexpected visitor knocked upon Poirot's door. It was Vivian Hale. She looked utterly transformed. Her confidence had vanished. I cannot bear this any longer, she said softly. Poirot invited her inside. She remained standing. I lied. About what? My walk on the terrace. Poirot waited patiently. I went to the library. Hastings stiffened. When? Just before 11. What did you see? The door was slightly open. And I saw Sir Adrian sitting exactly as he was later found. Dead. I believed he had fallen asleep. Did you enter? No. Why not? She lowered her eyes. Because someone else was already inside. Hastings leaned forward. You recognize them? Vivian hesitated. Tears gathered in her eyes. Only the silhouette. A man. No. A woman. Vivian nodded slowly. I heard her say. She struggled to continue. You have left me no choice. The room became perfectly still. Poirot spoke at last. Why did you conceal this? Because I was afraid. Of whom? Vivian's answer came almost as a whisper. Not of the killer. She looked directly at Poirot. I was afraid of the truth. Long after Vivian had gone, Hastings paced the room. A woman, he exclaimed. That changes everything. Poirot stood beside the window overlooking the moonlit gardens. No, it doesn't. It confirms what I already suspected. You know who the murderer is? Poirot nodded once. I know. And the motive? Entirely. Then why wait? Poirot's reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. Because the truth, Hastings, is like fine crystal. It must be handled carefully. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the folded parchment one final time. Tomorrow, every lie would be stripped away. Tomorrow, every secret buried for 2 decades would stand exposed. And tomorrow evening, In the drawing room of Ashcombe Hall, Hercule Poirot would gather every suspect together, not merely to identify a murderer, but to reveal a tragedy whose first victim had died 20 years before Sir Adrian Blackwood ever raised the velvet case containing the necklace of forgotten tears. Chapter 7. The drawing room of Ashcombe Hall had never seemed so oppressive. Rain no longer battered the windows, yet the silence inside the manor was heavier than the storm had been. Every chair had been arranged in a broad semicircle before the fireplace. The family portraits watched from the walls as though they, too, awaited judgment. At precisely 8 o'clock, Detective Adrian Beaumont entered the room. Impeccably dressed and carrying nothing but a slim notebook, he paused only long enough to glance at the faces before him. Charles Blackwood sat rigidly beside his sister Eleanor. Lady Margaret's expression was unreadable. Dr. Edwin Mercer stared at the carpet, while Vivian Hale clasped her hands tightly in her lap. Inspector Whitcomb stood near the mantel, arms folded, skeptical but curious. "Thank you all for coming," Beaumont said quietly. "Tonight, we shall concern ourselves not merely with a murder, but with a deception that began 20 years ago." No one spoke. "The police have pursued a straightforward explanation," he continued. "A son burdened by debt kills his father for money, steals a priceless necklace, and leaves behind evidence in his haste." He looked toward Charles. "It is an attractive theory." Charles swallowed. "But it is impossible." Inspector Whitcomb frowned. "You are certain?" "I am." Beaumont crossed slowly to the library table, where several objects had been arranged with meticulous care: the empty velvet jewel case, the torn diary page, the planted cufflink, and a sketch of the library. "The murderer wished us to notice these things," he said. The cufflink accused Charles. The missing necklace suggested robbery. The mysterious note implied a dying message. He shook his head. Each was designed to lead us away from the truth. The detective picked up the diary. Sir Adrian intended to reveal a secret at breakfast. Not the identity of an heir, but the identity of a person who had escaped justice for 2 decades. Dr. Mercer lowered his head. "You concealed the circumstances of a young servant's death," Beaumont said gently. "I did. You believed you were protecting the family. I believed I was protecting innocent people. And in doing so, you protected the guilty." The doctor closed his eyes but did not argue. Beaumont turned toward Vivian Hale. "You visited the library shortly before 11. She nodded silently. "You saw someone standing beside Sir Adrian." "I did." "You did not recognize the face. But you recognized something else." Vivian looked up in surprise. "The perfume." A faint tremor crossed her expression. It was the same perfume worn at dinner. Lady Margaret shifted almost imperceptibly. The detective noticed. "So did I," he continued calmly. The necklace itself was never the true object of the crime. Hidden inside its lining was a folded parchment containing names and dates, proof linking the tragedy of 20 years ago to someone still living in this house. Inspector Whitcomb stepped forward. "Then whoever stole the necklace was searching for that document." "Precisely. And after finding it, they overlooked one important detail." Beaumont smiled faintly. "They searched the wrong compartment." Several faces changed color. "The parchment I discovered was still hidden exactly where Sir Adrian had concealed it." A long silence followed. He began pacing slowly before the fireplace. "The murderer poisoned Sir Adrian before arranging the room. The wine glass was broken deliberately. The note was written afterward. The clock was manipulated to confuse the timeline. The cufflink was planted, and the necklace was taken to conceal the true motive." Each sentence stripped away another layer of deception. At last, Beaumont stopped. "There remains only one question." Every eye in the room fixed upon him. "Which one of you feared a forgotten crime so deeply that you were prepared to commit another?" No one answered. Outside, the wind stirred the ancient trees surrounding Ashcombe Hall. Inside, the detective looked slowly from one suspect to the next. His gaze settled. A single expression, fleeting, almost imperceptible, told him everything he needed to know. He folded his hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in an even voice, "I now know who murdered Sir Adrian Blackwood." The room seemed to stop breathing. The killer's composure finally began to crack. But before the name was spoken, the grandfather clock struck the hour. Chapter 8. The Final Revelation. The last echo of the grandfather clock faded into silence. No one in the drawing room moved. Even the fire seemed to burn more quietly, as though unwilling to disturb the moment. Detective Adrian Beaumont looked slowly around the assembled guests before speaking. The truth has been concealed beneath 3 layers of deception, he said. First, a theft. Second, a false trail. Third, and most important, a secret that should never have survived 20 years. His eyes settled on Lady Margaret Ashcroft. You told us there were no family secrets worth discussing. That was the first lie. A flicker of alarm crossed her face. You also claimed to have retired to your room shortly before 11. That was the second. Inspector Whitcomb stepped forward. You accuse Lady Margaret? I accuse no one without reason. Beaumont placed the folded parchment on the table. This document contains the names of those present when a young housemaid, Emily Carter, died 20 years ago. Everyone believed she had taken her own life after being blackmailed. Dr. Mercer lowered his head. I signed the certificate, he whispered. You concealed the truth, Beaumont replied. But you did not create it. He turned back to Lady Margaret. Emily had discovered something. Lady Margaret remained silent. She learned that valuable jewels from the Blackwood collection had been quietly replaced with expertly crafted copies over several years. Vivian Hale looked up in astonishment. The copies? Beaumont nodded. They were of extraordinary quality. Vivian's voice was barely audible. Only a skilled collector would have noticed. Exactly. Sir Adrian noticed only recently. He lifted the empty velvet jewel case. When he examined the necklace of forgotten tears before dinner, he realized the central sapphire had also been replaced. Charles frowned. So the necklace we saw was already a forgery. A murmur spread through the room. The real necklace had disappeared years earlier. Beaumont continued. Emily Carter discovered the theft. Before she could expose it, she was threatened. Desperate and frightened, she took poison. Dr. Mercer closed his eyes. I believed silence would spare the family. It spared the guilty. The detective looked directly at Lady Margaret. Her hands began to tremble. But Sir Adrian found the final proof hidden inside the imitation necklace's case. He intended to reveal everything at breakfast. Still she said nothing. So you visited the library. The room was utterly still. You spoke with your brother. You begged him to remain silent. When he refused, Beaumont's voice softened. You poured poison into his wine. Lady Margaret's composure finally broke. A tear rolled slowly down her cheek. I never meant. Her words faltered. I only wanted time. No, Beaumont replied gently. You wanted silence. She looked. I spent my life protecting this family. Eleanor shook her head, tears filling her eyes. You were protecting yourself. For a long moment, Lady Margaret stared into the fire. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, yes. The single word carried 20 years of guilt. Inspector Whitcomb stepped forward quietly. Lady Margaret Ashcroft, I must ask you to come with me. She did not resist. Before leaving, she paused beside Dr. Mercer. We both believed we could bury the past. The doctor answered sadly. The past has a habit of waiting. 2 days later, the fallen trees had been cleared and the bridge repaired. Ashcombe Hall no longer felt like a prison, though it had lost forever the illusion of being a sanctuary. The forged necklace was recovered from a hollow beneath the old chapel floor, exactly where Beaumont had predicted it would be hidden. The genuine necklace of forgotten tears, however, was never found. Whether it had been sold decades earlier or hidden beyond recovery remained one final mystery. As the morning train carried them away from the coast, Captain Hastings looked thoughtfully out of the window. It all began with a necklace, he said. Beaumont smiled faintly. No, it began with fear. He watched the cliffs disappear into the mist. People imagine that great crimes are born of greed. More often, they are born of the desperate wish to prevent yesterday from meeting tomorrow. For a time, neither man spoke. The rhythm of the train filled the silence. At last, Beaumont removed a tiny fragment of blue silk from his notebook, the last unnoticed trace from the velvet jewel case. He looked at it once, then let it drift into the wind through the open carriage window. Justice, he murmured, cannot restore what has been lost, but it can prevent a lie from becoming history. The train rounded the next bend, leaving Ashcombe Hall behind. The mystery was over. The forgotten tears, at last, had been remembered.